Hey there, Agile Displacer Beasts, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. We are still working our way through our secret sauce of helping clients get to MVPs. I hope these different aspects of the framework, these different blocks on the patchwork quilt of our MVP planning process is helpful for you, maybe inspiring some of your ideas. Maybe you can even put it together in a better way than I can, in which case I feel like you owe it to me to tell me what that is. But today, we are going to be talking about the user journey. So we've talked about the vision, we've talked about our personas. Today, we're going to talk about user journeys. Now, as we talk about this topic, one of the things that I need you to do for me, because we're going to be talking about things users want to get done, but I want you to not think about features, because that's not what we're talking about. In fact, you just forget about the fact that we're talking about software altogether. Because when we're talking about user journeys, what we're focused on is what are the things that a user wants to get done? What is the reason they want this software to begin with? What are the things that we are enabling them to do? Hopefully in an easy and a better way than they could without our software. So a user journey is a sequence of events where a user gets something that they want. So, I get hungry, I get in the car, I drive to McDonald's for some reason, I go through the drive-through, they ask me what I want, I tell them, I pull up to the window, I give them money, I pull up to the next window, I get my food, I go home, I eat my food. That would be an example of a user journey. It's the sequence of events where I, the user, got something I wanted. I got something done that I needed, right? And that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about user journeys. So we're not thinking about screens. We're not thinking about buttons. We're not thinking about technical administrative tasks. We are thinking instead of the actual real life things that the user wants and what they want to get done. Any software product that you build is probably going to handle several user journeys. Even if you build a very, very specialized software product, a lot of times you're still going to be handling more than just one single operation, right? It's going to be a few different things that people want to get done. And so most software, you might have lots of these. So in the beginning, as you're thinking about user journeys, you might think about them at a very high level because you'll probably have several, and then really kind of drill down into the ones that are likely candidates to go in early. So let's talk about what a user journey looks like when we're talking about software. Now, keep in mind, I want you to be thinking in terms of the user getting value. We're not talking about a list of features. We're not talking about screens. We're talking about things a user wants to get done. So the start of this journey usually starts before the user is actually using your software. What is it that prompted this whole thing, right? What is it that happened that triggered their desire to get this thing done or perform this action? And it normally, although not always, starts outside of the software. For instance, the little user journey I gave you about going to McDonald's, it didn't start at the drive-through, right? It started when I got hungry. That's the thing that kicked it off, right? Like, this thing happened, therefore I now need to use something to get something done. And so it's the same thing in your case, right? We care about this because we want the whole product, the whole MVP, to be driven by what the user wants to accomplish. What is it they want out of the product? How do we get them that value that they care about in the easiest way possible? There's an apocryphal quote that goes around. It gets ascribed to several different sources, depending on who you ask. But the quote goes, people don't want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole, right? And as software developers, we tend to focus a lot on the drill, right? We think about the drill and how big the drill needs to be and the material it needs to be made out of. How good a drill can we create? And we forget that the only reason anybody owns a drill is because they need the hole for some reason. And we might even argue that the hole isn't even what they're after. It's not like people just want to put holes in stuff. They do that because something else needs to happen, right? They need to run cable, or they need to bolt something together or something to that effect, right? So we don't focus on the tool. We focus on why we even bother plugging the tool in, right? Why do we even bother using it? And once you have that trajectory, you're on the right path, right? Because now as you're planning out things like your features and your screens and things like that, it's all driven by this idea of what is the user trying to get. And that will inform all of our decisions, right? So when I'm creating the screen for that thing, I'm thinking about what is the easiest way to get the user done, right? What is the quickest way through that thing? And a menu structure or a screen layout or a UX pattern that might be familiar to me as a software developer may not be the best way for users to get their stuff done at all, right? So we really want to have a good handle on what kicks this off, right? What is the thing that makes me want to use the software to begin with? And then, of course, there's the middle of the user journey, which is where most of it takes place. And this is what are the steps they need to take to get the thing that they want, right? And typically, this involves them opening up the software and doing things in the software. Or potentially, they already have the software open. Maybe this is something they use at work, so it's always open, right? But something happened and they need to do something in the software now, and that's what we're thinking about. But even as we're at this place in the user journey, I want you to be thinking about what they're accomplishing at each step. Really try hard not to think about it in terms of UI stuff. Try not to think, well, then they're going to go to this screen, and then they're going to go to that screen, and then they're going to click this button, and then they're going to use this drop down, and then that's going to take them to this other screen. Just try to divest yourself out of all that. Now, that can be really difficult, especially if you are enhancing an existing system or replacing an existing system. A lot of times we tend to think about the process in terms of that software. So we think about this screen and this area and that area, but really try hard not to do that. Instead, we want the user journey to look like what the user is trying to accomplish at each of those steps, not necessarily what the UI is going to be that they do that in or how the screens are laid out. Now, those steps may inform how we lay the screens out, right? Like we might want their journey through the app to mirror their journey through the user journey, right? And so we create a UI and a workflow that looks a lot like that. But we really want to be thinking about the work or the play or whatever it is they're trying to do in the app and let that drive our thoughts on this user journey. User journey might possibly be long, right? They may have to do a lot of stuff before they finally get the thing that they want. Although you might look at that user journey and see if it can be subdivided, right? See if there's value along the way where we might break that user journey off. Also, user journeys might branch, right? They might get to a certain point, and if a certain thing happens, then they're going to go down one path. And if something else happens, they're going to go down a different path. And that's fine too. It's perfectly fine to have user journeys that branch, but that's kind of what the middle looks like. It's the sequence of steps. And then finally, we get to the end. What has the user accomplished and what do they do after they've accomplished it? Typically, they close the software, right? Or if it's something at work, they might not close the software, but typically it's logging off, closing the software, going away from their computer, doing whatever. And so the end is pretty easy to write, right? User closes app. It's often the easiest place to write, but we want to make sure that they've gotten the value before they do that. And this is our opportunity to kind of look back at the journey and look to see if we've got any unnecessary steps in there. Because again, we're not thinking about the software so much. We're thinking about the process of getting things done. Is there steps in there that don't need to be there to get the value? Or did we miss anything, right? Did we miss any steps that are really important now that we're looking at it? I find that having business people talk through these user journeys is one of the quickest ways for business users to streamline their own business process. I'll give you an example. I was doing this workshop once for a client, and the user journey was about generating a quote. And we had this user journey. We were talking about that. We were talking about the steps. And then the underwriting assistants go, oh, wait, we forgot the thing about the checklist. And everyone else in the room is like, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, we have a 15-page checklist that we fill out before we finalize the quote for sending out. Nobody had any idea what they were talking about. Not the underwriters, not the department head. The only people who ever looked at this checklist were the underwriting assistants. Nobody else even knew it existed. Nobody in the bank even knew that it existed. And so we asked the underwriting assistants, like, why do you make them do this? And they're like, I don't know. It's just part of the process we were taught. Well, does anybody look at it again? No. Is it a legal compliance thing? No. Well, okay, let's not do that, right? So by looking at the user journey, we identified a big piece that didn't really need to be there, right, to get the value. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, we just saved the client some time and money building out features that they don't need, right? We would have had to build out that 15-page checklist. But the other thing is we actually made the business itself more efficient without writing a line of code, right? And the whole reason that we were building this software was because this particular client was having real trouble with their competitors who could get quotes out much, much faster than they could. Well, when you cut a 15-page checklist out of the quoting process, you get it done faster, right? So now they've become more competitive. The whole reason that we're building the software, now we're getting to see that without having to write a line of code. So spelling out these user journeys and really talking about those steps and reviewing them for unnecessary pieces or critical pieces we might have overlooked is going to be really helpful. It really helps the business kind of reflect on their own processes and really think about what needs to happen in order to get these things done. So that whole exercise right there is just gold. It's just gold on its own. So take your time to do it and take your time to do it right. So if I were going to give you an example user journey, and I'm just going to freestyle here, I'm just going to spit bars for a while. So I might not get this entirely right, and it might not be the world's best user journey, but I didn't want to write one out and read it to you. So I have a friend, Kyle. Kyle plays pickup volleyball games. I assume they're pickup volleyball games. He keeps talking about all the beer that he drinks at these things. So, I mean, that doesn't sound like a professional league to me, but what do I know? I don't play volleyball, but he plays pickup volleyball games. So let's say I wanted to build an app that would help Kyle put together ad hoc pickup volleyball games with his friends. Schedule games, maybe even put, leagues together, ladders together, keep track of them, send out invites, send out reminders, maybe even book the location. That's something one does when they're putting together volleyball games. I don't know. This is not a domain I know very well. But let's say I was going to make an app and I wanted to do all that stuff. Okay. So I'm thinking about the user journey or the different user journeys, actually. I rattled off a whole lot of stuff there, right? And so let's start with this. Okay. Kyle is in the office. He has had a hard day at work. He is stressed out and exercise makes him feel better. We know that from our persona. So he decides he wants to play a pickup volleyball game with his friends. So that's the start of the user journey. Something happened that triggered the sequence of events, right? He had a hard day at work. He's stressed. So he wants the volleyball game. So he opens the app. He goes to a list of his friends. He picks the friends that he wants to be involved in the volleyball game. He sends them all invites. They all collaborate on a time available. He selects the time available. It sends out the final instructions to everybody. He closes the app. Later on that night, he goes to the volleyball game and plays volleyball. So that would be an example of a user journey, right? We talked about the start, what kicked it off. We talked about the things he would need to get done in order to do that, right? He's got to notify his friends that he wants to play. He's got to invite them. They have to agree on a time. They have to set the time. They have to finalize those plans so that everybody knows it. And then at least for that part of the journey, they're done. Now, if we were really building an app, then we'd want to be a little more critical than that thing I just rattled off, right? We might be like, okay, well, you also need to figure out a place. I assume that, but let's say there's a place they go every single time, right? Let's go to the old, volleyball hall and play some games there and have some beers, I don't know. So we would be more rigorous about it, but you get the idea, right? What is the thing that the user is going through that kicks this thing off? What are the things they're going to need to get done in order to get the value, which in this case is he wanted to book an ad hoc volleyball game. He wants the volleyball game. He wants the volleyball game to happen. That's what kicked it off. Here are the things he's going to need to do in order to get that volleyball game. And at the end, he does, right? And the app is part of that journey, right? It occupies a lot of the middle pieces, right? So that's an example of a user journey. All of them kind of look similar to that, except with a little bit more rigor. So as we're thinking about this, as we're thinking about the different ways that our personas might want to use our software and the things they might want to get done, this is where having prioritized our personas is going to be really helpful, right? Because not all user journeys are going to be equally valuable, and they're sure not going to be equally valuable to anyone. Let's talk then a little bit about things like dependencies, right? What if you have user journeys that need or seem to need other user journeys complete before you can do that user journey. You'll notice when I told that story, I didn't say anything about logging in, right? I didn't say anything about setting up the friends in the friends list, right? I just said he was going to pick his friends. They're already there, right? I didn't say anything about those things, right? So we might be looking at that user journey and be like, oh, well, before we do that, then these other things have to happen. But I want to challenge that a little bit. Don't put together a user journey just because you feel like it is logically prior to whatever user journey you actually think is more valuable or more important. I mean, let me ask you this. How is this MVP going to be used? Is it you're going to show it to beta testers? If so, then just pre-populating it with test data is probably going to get you where you need to go, right? You don't need to build out any of that stuff I just said. Is it going to be the free tier demo for 7 days version of your product? Well, maybe you might need to build a little bit more of that stuff out, but I really want to challenge this idea of saying, well, before we do this user journey, we need this other user journey. The other thing to consider is, can these dependencies, the things that a user journey might need in order to be sustainable, can they be handled another way, right? Could you handle sign-on with Google? Could you pre-populate the app with users already built in there? Could you use cookies or the browser's local storage cache for state in your application? Do you really need a database in order to be able to have a working user journey where you deliver that value? Really be rigorous with that, because I think you'll find that for many user journeys, even though they may come later in the suite of things your application can do, right? They need a user, they need a friends list, whatever. Depending on how this MVP is going to be used, you can probably create that user journey in software without those dependencies being up and running. And I encourage you to be very rigorous about that, because this is the mindset you have to have when we're talking about an MVP. So what you want to do is you want to come up with some core user journeys that you've come up with that sequence. Like I said, you might think about like a big list at a high level, but just kind of break down like, 5 or whatever, really break them down into their sequences. And I would recommend that you pick one. Again, if it's just impossible to take that high priority user journey and get it out the door without getting another one done, I mean, fine. I'm going to trust you. You're going to be able to pick that. In rare circumstances, you might have to handle more than one user journey. But, for the love of all that's holy, do not make your first user journey logging in, right? Do not make it retrieving your password. Nobody cares about that, right? Make it something that people are going to care about. Make it something that's going to validate your hypothesis. Why do we want to do this? Because if you start with a user journey is the user needs some value. It starts with that, and it ends with them getting that value. So if you build the software, the MVP around the user journey, it's going to be valuable. You are going to deliver value if the MVP can facilitate a user journey. Automatically value right out of the gates. Even if it's just small, even if it's just tiny, that's okay. We're trying to get the smallest thing out the door that we can, right? And the other thing is that the MVP needs to be a mechanism for meaningful feedback. Do you think my beta testers are going to give me meaningful feedback on whether password retrieval was fun or not? No, nobody cares about that, right? But as soon as I create a user journey in software, it's something people want. It's something that they care about. They're going to give me feedback. They're going to tell me if they liked it or not, or what they didn't like, or what I forgot, or whatever. And now I can use that feedback to validate my hypothesis and make decisions about what's going in the product next, or how I might change this implementation. I really hope this is helpful for you guys. If you have any questions about user journeys, feel free to reach out to me. I walk people through this all the time, but I will say don't skimp on this step. As I said, this is worth its weight in gold. Helping the business navigate through their user journeys, getting them spelled out, getting them somewhere where you can see them. I like to use sticky notes on the wall. And then that if you pick one and build your MVP around that, that the MVP, it's going to be minimum, but it's also going to be viable. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.